our dear lickers out there. Here are we back again, your most favorite Babylons, Layla, Alex, and Michael from the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. Now we are split again because Layla traveled a bit and is participating from a different part of the universe. And since Layla traveled, we just thought this might be a good opportunity to ask the realistic travel question, where each of one would travel to in a realistic term if money and time and other things wouldn't matter. So maybe Alex, you want to start?
Oh, it's a difficult question, but for realistic things that I could conceive doing at some point, I would love to go to the very northern parts of North America, maybe even something like Greenland, because I've already seen a little bit of Scandinavia and the northern parts of that, but seeing the even wilder, less tamed version of that would be very fascinating.
Really, nothing mattered and nothing could get in the way. I have to think of my old dream to travel the Trans-Siberian route, to travel by train from Berlin through Poland, Belarus, through Russia into Asia, like probably somewhere like Mongolia. I would really like to get on that Ulaanbaatar, I think. It's not possible at the moment, but that would be my ultimate dream. Like, that was always my dream journey that I watched travel documentaries about when I was younger, before the situation gets so fucked up like right now. So that would be my biggest dream. I'm thinking about replacing a bit of that adventure with going to Transylvania by train. That would be like the more realistic version that I'm thinking about doing soon. But the ultimate dream would definitely be traveling from Europe to Asia by train on that route.
Yeah, well, on my part, it's unfortunately not something as inspiring as you two, but it would be for me something to travel as far as possible, and I think the destination would some kind of be reflected in my mood, what I would be willing to do more at that point. It would be something between New Zealand, Japan, or South Korea. The reasons are very different. New Zealand just for the landscape, and maybe a bit because of the Tolkien movies. And Japan and South Korea just for the culture and the absolutely different kind of lifestyle they have there. So the synopsis for this episode, which was the Mind War. Technically, we have two synopsis strengths on this episode as well as the last episode. So we have Catherine, who is on her own, more or less, traveling to a planet called Sigma 957, and her endeavors there. And the other part is that the PsiCorps is visiting Babylon 5 because they are in search of let's say rogue turned telepath. I think that we can keep it this short because we're getting more into detail later. So maybe first impressions. Well, I have to start on this one probably. I have to admit, for me, this episode was quite. I knew what would happen. The whole rogue telepath thing was nothing that surprised me. Maybe it's because it's a storyline that by now is used quite often. Maybe I'm not sure how the 90s were with this, if it was something new or already an old hat. But yeah, that was quite anticlimactic for me, which turned the whole episode quite boring, I have to admit.
I really enjoyed that episode, actually. Like, I always enjoyed when I rewatch it because I feel like there it really opens up an atmosphere that I really like for Babylon 5. I think the music that we have in this whole telepath storyline is kind of a very atmospheric one. Always reminds me of 90s goth rock, I have to admit. I don't know if that even was intended, but it always reminds me of it. As well as in the other plot line with Catherine, where you also have this big mystery moment in the end. So the atmosphere was very strong, and I don't know. I feel like maybe that episode even lives off the fact that you rewatch it when you already know what is going to happen if the characters could catch you emotionally at some point. Maybe it lives off that, because I don't know how it was the first time for me, actually, but this time I really, really was on board with it.
I'll agree that I think this is a very nice episode, but I don't think it works very much as a mystery plot of like figuring out what happens. I think you're right there, Mike, that both as a trope that is very well known, and we already had Ivanova kind of tell us, oh, the PsiCorps are bad people, and this is what happens if somebody tries to go rogue. So there wasn't much of a surprise there. But I do think it still has some very nice parts where it just shows you the extent of what these kinds of plots go to, and the extent to what PsiCorps is doing. And at least for me, this is always where it, like Leila says, opens up the gates a little bit, just to give a little bit of scope to the show and to this conflict that is sort of simmering in the background. But maybe we can explore some of these more in the discussion, and because this episode is so neatly structured into two plots, maybe as usual we can start with one of them, and maybe let's start with the major one, the telepath plot, and talk about the journey that Ironheart takes as he is becoming something greater than human, as I think Bester describes it.
Well, what I found quite funny or interesting was the take at the beginning, that when the PsiCorps people arrive, that when they talk to, I think it was a security guy, when they arrived, that they didn't talk, and obviously the security guy didn't even get it, that he wasn't talked to but communicated through, I don't know, mind, space, whatever. That was quite interesting to watch, because it was at that moment with the security guy, it was not discussed more, and it just got further with Sinclair. So I like that, because it had a bit of a stall in there.
Yes, I also told Alex this time that I realized for the first time, actually, that Sinclair was about to respond to something they told him telepathically, and then noticed. Like in the first watch, or the first few watches, because this is the part I've watched a bit more than just one, I always just thought that he was responding or saying something, and then Saro stood in front of him, and therefore got mad. But that it was really this fact that kind of he noticed there. I found that very interesting as well.
And I like how casual this is as an introduction. We learn a lot about PsiCorps in this episode, which is one of the parts that I really enjoy. But before we are told anything about them, we just see these two PsiCorps in their uniform, casually like transgressing against one of the most important rules that have been established about telepaths. We know from Talia, and even in the Gathering, this isn't something that you're supposed to do. And here these guys come strolling and immediately like throw any kind of right to privacy or such out of the window. And also this moment that the normal guy, the normal security guard might not even notice this, because probably the brain just doesn't differentiate so much immediately that this is a telepathic message or not. And so it's not until Sinclair that this is really brought into conflict. So it immediately like established the dynamic very much, that these guys obviously view themselves as something different, a higher authority even than the commander of the station. That's quite a challenge.
Yeah, and especially their attitude is like this, oh, we're so much better than the rest here, and I mean, especially this first interaction with Sinclair, you really get this vibe thrown into your face. You can't not realize this, how arrogant and aloft these people are.
And then maybe as long as we are still close to the first impressions, as you have this acting, I don't know if this even jumped out as you as much because you're not that much of a Star Trek fan, but what did it feel like to see Chekhov finally in a different role where he actually gets to be serious for once? Because this is like one of the main things about this episode, that this is one of the first times where the actors really start mixing up between Trek and Babylon 5.
I have to admit, I started watching with Star Trek with the Next Generation. So the first batch of Star Trek is more or less something not really something I never really watched closely. Just know a few bits here and there from others.
I mean, this is great, so you can enjoy the character entirely untainted from previous notions.
Well, that maybe as a hint, because you say you know some bits here and there. The character Alex is referring to is the Russian guy on the original Enterprise. Maybe you remember him.
Yeah, that much I do know. Though I have to admit, that stuck to me because of a comedian who was making fun of Star Trek.
I think we had this connection before when we were talking about Ivanova's Russian accent, so it's nice that these two get to meet here and have some interactions, and on a much more serious note. Obviously, there is the entire arrival of Ironheart to talk about, but maybe before we go forward into this plot, we can talk a little bit about the presentation of PsiCorps, even just in these first scenes, because this for me is something that always stuck out a lot as getting to know for the first time this organization, which in its attire, in the way that they present themselves, even just the entire role is described as sort of special police that hunts down fugitive that are like part of the Earth Alliance. And we learn in this episode also they engage in like some level of human experimentation. I can't help but watch this, and immediately you have this reference. Like this is very clearly like a Nazi parallel that's being opened up here, just in the demeanor, right down to the fact that Alfred Bester is a very German-sounding name, apart from being also literally a reference. So to me, this immediately opens up the question, as it always does in sci-fi, how does this happen? Like, how do you have an organization that seems this overtly evil and it comes about? And usually the way sci-fi does this is that it's always this like cautionary tale of, well, maybe people have just forgotten. Maybe there's not enough awareness of our history, so they don't see the warning signs anymore. But I wonder how much this applies here, where we have characters that have referenced this sort of history before. And for me, it also just always opens up a little bit this conflict. This is PsiCorps, it's very much antagonistic in this episode, but at the same time, it's part of the same government and of the same side as Earth Force that also all our hero characters are serving for.
On the other hand, later on, if it's true or not, I think it's Ironheart who says it, that PsiCorps is some kind of, in some way, trying to liberate itself, to distance itself from the government, to be more independent and everything. And this kind of gives the feeling that it's, I don't know, you kind of expect some push or I don't know, it's we do our own thing, and it's at a point, especially in if you have the experiments in the background, it feels like they turn into our modern term of an evil corporation that just gives a fuck about the rest of the world and just is just focused on money, or in their case, power of telepath or telekinesis.
And maybe this is a good point because you mentioned this last time, Leila. Maybe this is a good moment to maybe do this small excursion into the history of PsiCorps, which is talked about in some of the books. And I think without spoilers, we can get a little bit into how this relationship comes about, because I think, Michael, what you said is very correct, that this you're expecting there to be the sort of push of separation between the two.
I haven't read all of the PsiCorps books, only the first one. But I think it's the most important one because that is really where everything gets started. And the first thing that I now thought about actually was when we draw, or thought about the last time when we draw this connection between how the PsiCorps works and appears and any kind of Nazi regime. That with Bester, his backstory is kind of interesting, or more or less the backstory of his family.
We can connect the two. So there are these books that give us a little bit of insight in how PsiCorps comes about. And one of the interesting things is that telepathy is something that humanity discovers right around the same time that it really starts going to the stars. But this is an era where Earth Alliance isn't a global organization yet. And it's interesting that you immediately see this tension where PsiCorps has two sides to it, where on the one hand, it is originally created by normal humans as this way of controlling telepaths. So this idea that, oh, these are people that have special abilities, we need to put them into a special school that trains them and such, and we have to sort of separate them away from the rest of society because they inherently threaten our rights of privacy and such. But then at the same time, it also immediately develops into this organization where the people that control the telepaths obviously have to be telepaths themselves, and this immediately creates this antagonism where on the one hand, PsiCorps is this tool of oppression for the telepaths, but on the other hand, it's also this conspiratorial sort of separate faction that, like you say, almost takes on this role of a mega corporation that exists aside from the state and does its own thing. And this tension just keeps rising as history goes on, and this organization grows more and more powerful. And like Ironheart talks about in this episode, there's this growing concern that, is it really the government still controlling PsiCorps, or is it the other way around? And both scenarios ultimately have a lot of potential for going wrong.
Yes, and you also see in the books that there were a lot of other ideas, that there were a lot of other attempts to deal with telepath. Like you have a lot of organizations that pop up that try to find a not as authoritarian way to contain telepath. So the PsiCorps is really like the most extremist way that could really establish itself, but also because of this fundamental fear, because how is our society going to work if there is no privacy anymore? And what I find interesting is that Bester, who we see here as the ultimate evil mind behind after this, actually is the son of two of the leading rogue telepath in the first book. Like the ones that led the rebellion, that led the revolution, kind of. They had a son, and at some point it got lost and was raised by PsiCorps. So he is probably himself not really aware of it, or I think in his position he could have found out and is aware, but is already brainwashed enough to like that, actually. But I find it interesting that here also the show makes the point of, the show really makes the point that it doesn't really matter as who you are born. It's so much more important how you're raised and what you learn while you are on this earth. Like here we have someone who really functions for this oppressive authoritarian Nazi organization who was the son of the exact opposite and could have also been the other way around, which is interesting. That really opens up this. It doesn't matter where you come from. It's really just what forms you as a person, what you do that defines you.
And this is something where I think the books and the show really connect with one another, because this is the same point that's brought up by Ivanova when she's talking to Talia, where Talia is this telepath who says of herself, well, I don't think of myself as a victim. I don't feel like I'm part of a horribly authoritarian regime. And the fact that she doesn't have this awareness, that it doesn't seem to her like this, has so much to do with the fact that she was brought up by the core. And because of this, you have this strong core of people in there that will just never have the impetus to really question it, because it only comes up for those who fall are outside of the margins and get hunted down like Ironheart does. And this then also ties into the fact that, yeah, a lot of PsiCorps seems to have to do with bringing up people. The fact alone that he was an instructor at PsiCorps that had some kind of romantic relationship with one of his students, which is a whole bag in and of itself, goes into this idea that apparently PsiCorps really, really tries to emphasize this, almost indoctrinating people to the point where even getting romantically involved is okay as long as it binds you stronger into the sort of hierarchy that they've set up.
Yes, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Talia herself is mentioned in the first book as the descendant of someone from the rebellion, but I can't tell who it was. I know that Besta really is the child of the leaders, which makes it especially sad that because they catch him as a baby, so he's completely brainwashed. But Talia, you see her diary entries from her when she was like 10 or 12 years old, where she hates PsiCorps and wants to go, and at some point she gets a special treatment and then loved PsiCorps. Was that her or was it her mother? No, I think it was her.
It's definitely part of a family history, and it just emphasizes the fact that on the one hand, PsiCorps works on this level of any like organization that gets to teach children, where this immediately already gives you the control to shape their worldview completely, and then you just add this little pinch of they can also directly mess with your mind, and it creates the situation where there's just no good way for an opposition to this to form.
Yeah. So how did we get here? Actually, what was the point?
Just a tangent to pull the books as part of the conversation, which obviously we don't want to exclude Mike too much from the story, but what it boils down to is this idea that you find this extension of what the show's already talking about, that PsiCorps is a lot about how people are brought up, and that it's like mostly a massive organization that just pushes people into this corner where most of the time they will never get a chance to really question the structures that are in there. And this is something that Besta seems to really embody, where he just fully embraces in this episode his role, and also his role as something distinctly separate from the rest of humanity. He very much at any chance points out that he is better, that he is more efficient, and both in his professional capacity but also just as a human being with his intrinsic abilities.
We could talk about for a second. I mean, I know that we cannot answer this question completely here because it's a bit of foreshadowing, but maybe we could think about, does this, that humanity suddenly has telepaths, or finds out that they have telepaths, that they discover them at the point when we are about to go to the stars, does that mean that we've always had telepaths among us and we're just never able to prove it? Or not, or did it come later? Maybe that's also something to think about or to have theories on, because it's never stated that this means that we've always had telepath. But yeah, that's something, I guess, to keep in mind, that there could also something be interesting about it.
And this is something that I would love to hear Micah's thoughts on. Do you have a theory on this? Which one it might be?
Yeah.
Or a preference, maybe?
I would say I have a preference. I wouldn't say I have an opinion on this, because there's there's quite a lot of information missing to make their the proper decision. I like the idea that in some way there always been telepaths or something similar, or something you could categorize as a telepath, because there's so much. I mean, I'm here again with the theme of, with the topic of depression. Depression is something that always has been there, always existed, but there was no one realized what it is, what it was. It was said, oh, someone was depressed. Oh, you had a old witch sitting on your chest when you sleeping, and there we have. That's the reason why you're not feeling good. That was the explanation, but actually it was depression, which no one had an idea of, and just like that, I would like the idea that there always something like telepath or something fitting in this category existed.
This is really interesting because almost for exactly the same reason, I'm usually not a big fan of these kinds of insertions, because I always fear, and this has a lot to do with the execution of it, but I always fear that you then can fall into this trap of saying, oh, telepaths were always a thing, and this is why we had witches trials, for example. They were just telepaths that did supernatural thing in the past, and then they got caught, and this is why it happened. And that always has this, like, not so nice undertone of validating these sort of paranoia and these historical like persecution that happened in some places. On the other hand, I really like the idea of saying it's completely normal that we as a society had not known things about how the human mind works, so it would be easy to extend this to telepathic abilities as well. While we're
Yeah, but I have to add there that I think what you can't exclude in this thematic is that what was the reasons given why people were burned as witches. I mean,
yeah.
I just recently read something that there was a woman considered to be a witch because she used makeup, and because the thought behind this was she used makeup to elevate her beauty and not accept her God-given beauty, and with this trying to get on men and stuff like that. She was lucky she was a noble woman, so she wasn't burned, but had some kind of a shame walk, barefooted through the city. But yeah, the reasoning for this is like, please no.
Yes, and I think that's important in witch trials, that most of the time there is no real reasoning, or like you just had this reasoning that really makes you like, what? Because I mean, when I looked into it, I really realized that there was never really anything about the individual that you could have argued for. I mean, most witch trials even were illegal at their own time when you look at them legally. It was really just that you were in the wrong situation when the people got hysteric, I guess. Because I mean, even like a mole in the wrong place could basically make you a witch. So it's that's why I also have to agree to some point that I also find that maybe problematic to use that as an explanation for things that we've always been aware of. But I find it super interesting that this idea of telepathy has always been there. So there's definitely something about the human mind, about how it works, that always has given us this idea, why not that? So the relationship there is definitely a very interesting one. I agree.
I mean, the question is, where would you start and where would you end this categorizing of a telepath? I mean, we have this situation, or I know the situation. I have a friend, we basically grew up together, and we quite often end each other's sentence just because we know each other so well. But if you could, if you want to write this into a telepath story, you could do this, even though there is a realistic reason why this works the way it is. So yeah, it's a really mushy thing where you have to set clear rules. Okay, this is inside of the category telepath. This is not a telepath. I think we would need a whole podcast just to clarify what we actually mean to define this category.
That about the book, the first one, how they found out that telepath actually existed, was that there were researchers from neuroscience and psychology, I think, and they had to write a certain paper, and they were studying, so they were still not full researchers, and they had to write a paper just where they could prove a point that they could do like a representative study, like an empirical study. And they always pick a research topic that is bullshit. Like they always pick traditionally something that can't exist so that they can play around with the data as much as they want to. And in this case, they figured out, oops, we have resolved. There is something about telepathy that is real. And I just love that. That is, yeah.
And I really think that that's a really great way to establish something like that, because, I mean, there's so much inventions that just happened because of an accident, or, I mean, I think one of the best examples is penicillin. I mean, it was just, I forgot to put this stuff away. Oh, wait, some strange mushroom started growing in this thing. Oh, let's have a look what it is.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I really like this idea.
In general, it's very good at portraying this discovery of telepathy as this random chance event that also throws a wrench into all of Earth history, because it immediately becomes this very polarizing topic where nations that specifically do not want to join the Earth Alliance, that are opposed against this like total global world government, become at the same time then also like the last destinations, the last holdouts where telepaths can flee to, because this is where PsiCorps doesn't reach. And this immediately becomes like a major point of contention between them, and one of the reasons why Earth Alliance and also has reasons like causes to take over the rest of the world, which in general paints a very interesting picture of the Earth Alliance as well, that it's not this like singular moment where all the world comes together and says, we are friends now because we've discovered aliens and this is a bigger thing. No, it's a long and painful process where it slowly absorbs everything.
Yes. Also, I wanted to mention the books are not written by the writer of the show, but are outlined and other people then wrote it together. But the main points are still his own, right?
Yes. It's most of the extended content for Babylon 5 is very messy, but the books and the comics are all based specifically on outlines that was put there by James, so we can definitely use them as extensions to the story. And like you said, we could have maybe we will have an entire special episode on telepaths alone. It might be warranted at some point. But the point that you two made, that at some point you would have to have like a stricter categories of what you even count as telepaths. This is also for the first time something that Babylon 5 introduces in this episode with a P rating. And we don't get very clear instructions on this. We just know P5 is what Talia is, and that is already what we would see as a supernatural telepath, like somebody who can legitimately read your thoughts and can tell whether you're not lying or not, beyond what is possible with like modern day technology and modern day understanding of psychology. And then you know that this scale goes up to P10, P12, where people seem to have like the ability to block scans and interact with each other on more complicated levels. So presumably between P0 and P5, there are all of these like subcategories where you say maybe there's just somebody who is extremely empathic, or somebody who is able to interact with specific humans to a degree that is just slightly statistically relevant, but not anything beyond what we could even imagine today. So this will be something to dig into.
The point there also is that even if you are like half a P, basically, you still are owned by PsiCorps. Like, you still have to join. You're still under their control. Even when you are a P1 or whatever, it's basically not relevant for anyone, because you sense so little. So they own you immediately. What I also find interesting there is when what is he called? Ironheart?
Yes, the most 90s name imaginable.
Yeah. When he explains to Talia the experiment that he had joined, that we see how rare telepaths are and how rare these telekinetic types are among them. And I don't know, maybe it was more of a joke, but and when he said that half of the telekinetic people are clinically insane, I just looked at Alex and was like, how can you still be clinically insane at this point? Because I felt like even this term of he meant really insane, he meant like psychotic, completely out of reality. At this point, I felt like, what does PsiCorps use as reality here? Like, how many of them are actually insane? Is that still objective? Because I think not.
Yeah, the perception of what reality even means, if you have like mind control over the rest of the world, and like the thought worlds of every person around you are part of your reality, it really becomes a difficult distinction to make. And I mean, this gives PsiCorps also one of these hallmarks, that they claim this authority to persecute people, and the framework that they're based this on, just like racism, is just very, very foggy on the fringes, and it gives them very much leeway to say, oh, this person, yeah, he's a P 0.5%, so this gives us authority over him, and then they can like use this to get out of people.
At that point, I don't get that many like Nazi vibes from them, but they remind me more of yeah, like for example, I mean, I'm in Hungary right now, and yesterday we watched a classical Hungarian movie from the 60s that criticized the Soviets when they still could, but then the movie was banned for a long time, and just how these communist systems and regimes played around with reality. Because in that movie we also had a functionary from the party who was like, yeah, I'd say slightly losing his mind, because he was playing around with reality so often, like he sold a lemon as an orange just to win a game, basically to promote the party, and was always taking pills because reality was always fucking him up. So I get these vibes from PsiCorps, how they play around with reality at that point, really.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the point that we learn in this episode, at least intangibly, how rare telepaths are. But this is something that I would like to throw out as a question. Is it really that rare? Because if he says like 1 in 1,000 people are a telepath, that means any city that you're in is going to have hundreds of telepaths. PsiCorps must be a massive organization, because if we're talking about millions, billions of people, there are hundreds of thousands, millions of telepaths around that you have to control, or that you claim control over. And even if just a small fraction of this is actually like powerful, it's still in a situation where you are not going to live your life without interacting with telepaths. They are common enough that you will run into them, unless, and this is where it becomes a really big problem, unless they are all just away somewhere in their like small separated society that is forced on them in some place. I think the scope of things is really quite unsettling there, that it's like a significant portion of human civilization that has just been shut off.
Interesting would be here to know how the low P ratings are handled. Do they have to just go on a like a visit to a doctor, or are they shut down somewhere? So we just have to, again, too few information about how this construction works.
Do we know the P rating of Ivanova's mother in general? I don't.
The way that it was described was that it didn't even register properly. Like, it was discovered very late. Part of the reason for this was that she, I think, only could have telepathic contact with very close family members. So it's it wasn't something.
Yeah, but then we know, I mean, like even Ivanova's mother, who then was a very, very weak telepath, was forced to take the medication. Right?
Yes. I mean, there's still the open question. She also had the option of joining the PsiCorps, but at this point you kind of question, well, what does that mean? If you're somebody who isn't really practically useful as a telepath, but still registers, my guess would be that you then just take menial jobs that are part of PsiCorps. Like, PsiCorps needs janitors and accountants, and this is then just the job that you have. You're just very restricted in where you can go.
Yeah, no, the point is that, yeah, like this, even the low P ratings are treated.
Yeah.
So we see that in Ivanova's mother, definitely.
Yeah, but also that's how they ensure that everyone, they get either their work for them or they don't exist.
Yeah.
It's a clear distinction they are making, just to get every piece of power they can get, no matter how small.
It's a very rigid system that is applied to a very fluid spectrum of abilities and like differences, and that always creates these points of tension. And we've talked about the very lower end of the spectrum. Maybe let's go to the complete opposite, to Ironheart himself, who apparently... Oh, sure.
Because now that we've talked about it for a while and also talked about the discovery of telepath, I actually have to think that I'm not so sure if at this point I like the narration that this is built up on, because I have to think of when we see of how what choices you have and it is discovered that you are a telepath. I have to think of it always reminds me of early discussions in psychiatry, like when medication against hearing voices or severe depression or whatever, and all of this medication stuff was kind of new. Like when it started to become a clinical discipline, like in the 70s or something, and it didn't really work out quite well in the beginning. Like nowadays, when you take medication, it more or less really just works against what you wanted to work against. But in the beginning, you were really numbing away completely sometimes because the dosages weren't clear and it was not as well developed. And so, from my point of view today, I would still never suggest to anyone, yeah, let's just stop taking your meds, you know. And in this telepath narration, I don't know, I find it difficult to see what kind of point at this point they want to make, because we always learn that, yes, a rogue telepath is a problem, even if it's just someone like P5, P4 who can just, sense superficial thoughts. But on the other hand, this narration encourages people to wait, where was my point? To see the treatment for hearing something no one else can hear as bad. And that is something that I find a bit problematic as well. Do you get my point?
I think I do, and this might just be down to the fact that Babylon 5 at this point doesn't seem very interested in giving any kind of positive outlook, but only focuses on the side what PsiCorps is doing badly in this situation. And I think the key distinction that you would have to make there is that PsiCorps' goal ultimately isn't really to develop any kind of medication that actually improves the lives of anyone. That taking the pill or joining prison are both sort of framed as punishment for not joining the Corps. At the point where you're not joining the Corps, it doesn't really care about you. And so you're sort of inclined to oppose this level of treatment because it isn't really treatment, it's a punitive measure.
Yeah, I still find the parallels to some kind of mental health treatments kind of complicated, I have to agree. But that may change if we discuss it at a later point when we know more about how telepath came to be. But I mean, if you have a severe mental illness, if you're psychotic or whatever, you also kind of have the chance of taking the pill or going to the hospital for a longer time.
Yeah.
And, in a very messed up brain that is paranoid and whatever, you can feel like in one of those plots. So it plays around with it in a kind of risky way, actually. But also it was written in a time when we weren't as sensitive for these cases, I think. Yeah, I just wanted to throw that into that. I find this whole plot of, oh my God, the voices you hear are actually real and the pills are not against an illness, they're just against your own ability. I find that difficult. Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's something we need to cut out if I say it, but I kind of get China vibes there with the instrumentalization of the people, like everyone's reporting each other, controlling each other, and those not fitting in the system are cast away. I'm not sure how the English version is pronounced. The Uiguren.
Okay.
Yeah, I really get strong vibes in this direction. I mean, this is a modern thing. I'm not sure how strong it was in the 90s.
Well, I mean, even in the 90s, you could find like equivalent practices in other countries. Then I think this is one of these universal things where, just also this idea of we have this group of people and we isolate them from the rest of society and install controls. And of course, that is for their own protection and for the protection of their culture, and definitely not because we want to ethnically cleanse them away or anything like that. And yeah, this for me is also one of these interesting tensions that PsiCorps opens up, because in both directions it's just very bad. It's bad as a tool of trying to segregate the telepaths away, but it's also a very bad tool for telepaths trying to take over the world. And I think there are a lot of problematic tensions that rise from the fact that it tries to be this very complex, intricate sort of portrayal of an organization that doesn't for this reason immediately map as a complete parallel to any of these real world issues. And I think, yeah, it just has to recognize that it can't be a completely valid statement on something like mental health, because it's trying to shoehorn so many other parallels in there as well.
Definitely. But I mean, in later episodes, I want to probably make a similar point to something else, just with narratives that I feel are kind of yeah, they play around with these narratives sometimes in ways that I find daring.
Yes, yeah. And this is something I heard people talk about with also some of the later stuff that James wrote, that early on, as he's writing Babylon 5, he has a very cutting way of dealing with some of these problems, and something that he himself also seems to have mellowed out on later on in life. So this is definitely something that we can observe here, that he's not being very soft going with any of these, but really like pushes into it. But okay, just looking at the time, we really should conclude with this storyline. And I don't know if there's going to be a massive discussion about this, but let's look at the other end of the spectrum, where we have Ironheart, the person who actually gets experimented on and then ascends to some space entity of some kind. And I think even in the 90s, this is something of a trope that, you know, if you just advance enough, you become an energy being, and then you're godlike and can do whatever. So this is maybe the least interesting part of it, but it does sort of chart a way that telepathy can be viewed as one of these ultimate paths of evolution for humanity to go in, which I just find interesting, because in a roundabout way, and this might also be problematic, it lends credence to Bester's attitude of I am better than you, I am the next step in human evolution, because now he can point at Ironheart and be like, yeah, see, if I go like 10 steps further, I'm there and you are not. So clearly I'm in the right here. And I think this is just something interesting to contend with, that now all our characters have seen this portrayal of what a future humanity might look like and have to sort of recognize that.
Before we go deeper in there, I'd just like to note that I find it quite nice to see that they often were smart enough to experiment on Ironheart and give him kind of an off switch.
Yes.
Unlike others in section.
They at least they tried, you know.
Yeah, they tried. They really thought, okay, this could go south. We need to take precautions in this. Even though obviously they were unable to really use it, but
I mean, to this point, oh sure.
I mean, that they put an off switch on it, and also when we talk about Bester's attitude, it makes you wonder what he knows or what ideas he's after, what kind of information he can access, where his abilities lead him. I can't say much more to it, but and maybe we can never even conclude this question actually while watching it, but it makes me wonder at this point, what information does he have that normals don't have?
I mean, in general, this goes for all of PsiCorps, right? You don't do these kinds of experiments blindly, I presume. They must have some idea that it is even possible to enhance these abilities, that it's possible to go from telepathy to telekinetics and such. So there's clearly some sort of reasoning in there. One thing that I really enjoy, and this kind of goes to your point, Micah, about the portrayal of Ironheart, is that he becomes immensely powerful, and even to the point where the off switch doesn't work on him anymore. But he's also still very fallible, very human in this sense throughout the entire story, because ultimately the entire plot just happens because he can read everybody's mind and have all information about the molecules around him and such, but he still has to do a human judgment on it, and he just misjudged his own development and endangered the entire station because of it, which is, I believe him that this is not something that he intended, but it almost went wrong because he just made a bad call. Or he talks about how he never wants to kill people, but never thinks of just wiping their mind. He just annihilates them completely, which, once again, I don't think he does this because he's evil, but he just doesn't have complete control over these powers, and so it's an imperfect evolution that we see there. And whether or not he gets over this by the very end, we don't really know, but I just enjoy this, that it's this chaotic process that even the person themselves can't really completely grasp.
Yeah, but also the imperfection just focuses on the ability and the control, not on his character. His character is, until the end, quite stable. He is this kind of good guy, good person who wants to make the right decisions and don't want to harm. So we have actually two different aspects here that at some points maybe work against each other.
And I think this is interesting, once again, if you do start making like parallels between telepathy and any other like psychological, I don't know if I can call telepathy that, but psychological condition that you might encounter, that it's here very clearly separated from, okay, there are things that are happening to your mind that are beyond your control, but those aren't reflecting on your character. Those don't necessarily change who you are on your own. And, you know, if you finish becoming at some point, you can still preserve that part. So maybe this is also something that they threw in there as part of trying to make a statement there.
Not really a distinction, I guess, because yeah, maybe I don't know if we actually get into it, but I don't think that's a distinction from mental health, because you have these people that have weird episodes, and when they come back, they are themselves completely. They have to deal with the mess they created.
I mean, whether or not this actually applies to mental health would be also a discussion worth having. But at least from how the episode seems to portray it to me, this is sort of the way.
But I don't think we have to actually go as far as mental health. It's I mean, just if you, as a perfectly healthy, balanced human, if you are stressed, you come to at a certain point or a certain level of stress, you sort of become a different person. You react in ways you normally wouldn't react. And if this mundane thing you compare what Ironheart is going through, that's really amazing to see that he's, even though, I mean, this is a heavy, stressful situation, something probably you would put in the section of PTBS, and he is still managing to stay the same in a way.
Most definitely, and I mean, we see how much right to the point does that even this puts him under physical distress the entire way through. This is like, the episode really emphasizes this part. But okay, unless we have any major conclusions to draw from this, and at least for my part, I think most of these are open questions that got just opened up for what telepaths are and how PsiCorps is going to continue. Maybe we can veer across to Catherine's little storyline, unless you might have something.
Yes, this small something I like to add there. Since Talia gets a gift from Ironheart, which is at least some sort of telekinesis abilities, since she's moving this coin, which seemed to unsettle her. I mean, she didn't really look happy when she was able to move that coin. The question of to what you said earlier, Alex, about the PsiCorps, what is their goal and everything. I mean, if you manage to enable someone to this level who is then obviously in the position to give other less powerful telepaths more abilities, more strength. I mean, if this person could be, I don't know, controlled or would have another mindset, what this could lead to. I mean, they could basically turn or give a push to all telepaths in PsiCorps, and they would be a wholly new force. I don't think anyone could contain in a certain way.
And I mean, this is this underlying thread of the episode, right? PsiCorps has managed to do this. And sure, he did everything he could to destroy the records and destroy the minds of the people that were involved in this. So probably for a long time, this research program is going to be stunted. But still, they know it's possible to do.
They managed it once. So what's stopping them from trying again
exactly.
at the second time?
And I mean, this is definitely something to look out for, to see like what is the R&D department on Earth up to? We know they have like biological technology. They now have the tangible ability to create godlike telepaths and stuff. So clearly there is something happening.
I was also always wondering why he gave her this ability, because they talked about how dangerous it was to be telekinetic.
Yeah, right? You'd think this is just painting a bigger target on her.
Maybe it was just also of nostalgia, because they talked about how they were in the academy together. But I want to add at this point, before we leave that storyline, that I don't know, it really kind of triggered the romantic in me. I really loved this description of what it means for a telepath to be in love with a telepath. There's the only moment when the voices stop. I find that so romantic and wonderful. I really love that scene where Talia tells it Sinclair. It's one of my favorites, actually.
But it's also a quite sad one, I think, because, I mean, if you always hear voices and this is the only option to shut it out, I mean, in the context of these two, it's really romantic and beautiful, but it also triggers for me the idea or the thought, okay, how many do this just to shut up the voices?
And does it work that way, or are you just this person searching and searching and searching? Because I think it has to be mutual to work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that opens a lot of problems. Yeah.
It's it's for me always connected to this tension where on the one hand, this is a very beautiful description and it gives you this outlook of how great of a gift telepathy can really be. But on the other hand, we see it in this pairing, which once again, it's an instructor at the academy and a student. And this is just, you can easily imagine if this connection is such a big, important moment and such a unique way of shutting out the voices outside, it's very easy to see how that could be used also in a very manipulative manner, which is not to say that this necessarily happened here. In this case, it might have been completely mutual and genuine. But even if it was, it's not hard to imagine that, you know, Bester is part of the same organization. So what is he going to do with that? Like, that is going to be a problem.
Bester had an affair with his associate.
Maybe.
It wasn't hinted at it, but I was thinking about it ever since.
It's very possible. I mean, he was quick to shoot the guy after he annihilated her, so maybe there was some emotion involved in this. But all right, to jump over to the other storyline, and it has sort of these two different parts to it. One is Catherine's preparation of this entire journey into her interactions with G'Kar, and then the journey itself, where she has this very special encounter over the Sigma planet.
Yeah, I mean, my question would be, did we ever really think that G'Kar was going to kill Catherine? Was he still that kind of a villain, or were we thinking that he was actually planning on something else, like saving her?
I mean, I have to admit, I wouldn't have thought he would kill her, but I wouldn't thought that he would save her just to save her. I always thought, okay, there's something more in there, like, I don't know, some resources or secret lab or something on Sigma 957 that he had to protect. That were my thoughts on it.
And I think I'm also...
That's really interesting, I think, because it totally makes sense to think like that about G'Kar, and you really just think in this smaller problems that all of us little mortal humans, little humanoids on the station have. And I think the reason why we see him act so differently is because we are introduced to a bigger space mystery. So that's kind of nice.
And I think I'm right in the same camp where I don't think I ever really believed that he is going to be the conniving villain that kills her off. But at the same time, every point that she makes, why he would be only obstructing her journey out of political reasons, like when she says that, oh, the Narn regime lays claim to this planet but doesn't really have the resources to utilize this, I completely believe that. I think this is a very valid point, and I think if the Narn regime had more resources, it probably would have done also more to try and get to this planet in between encounters and stuff like this. So I don't think any of her reasoning is wrong necessarily. And yeah, ultimately then I am kind of surprised of just how genuine his demeanor by the end is, where he just says, well, I just have no reason not to do this. And to be fair, this is an open debate in the community still. If maybe there was some bigger motive that he thinks, oh, he can hold this over Sinclair, that he saved his girlfriend or something like this. But I've always read this as something very honest.
And maybe I'm spoiling a little, mini, tiny bit that is not important for the main plot. But I think we learned already that he has a thing for Earthlings, that he...
Yes, he has. And we have learned this in the last episode when...
I think that he really just had a crush on Catherine and therefore saved her. That's my theory. He just finds her hot and doesn't want her to die so early.
I mean, that's fair.
Well, I honestly, I thought this a bit too, but not in this really deep way. Just that, oh, she looks nice, and oh, she's not a bad person, and she's not no one offending me or going against me. And well, I have the resources, I have the time. Why not? It's like I don't know. I can just do it. So,
and I'm very inclined to believe this, because the very first scene where it's mentioned that, oh, there's a third party in this deal that you will have to deal with, and then he arrives and has once again one of his flourishes where he just presents himself very chipper, and you get to see this isn't a serious diplomatic incident or something. He just gets to flex his power a little bit and just deal with somebody who just isn't that important, and I can totally buy that he enjoys this part of it. And yeah, that it's almost like this little game that he gets to play that has no stakes for once.
Yeah, and especially he can play his power game in his way without consequences for him.
Yes,
this is just like a little something he does to pass the time. I mean, I don't want to reduce it too much, but I wouldn't blow it up too much either.
I mean, one thing that I do believe, if we go to the final scene where he has this talk with Catherine, I believe this entire scenario is very fun for him because he gets to kind of mess with her a little bit. But I also feel like it's fun for him because it gives him a reason to once again deal with these walkers of Sigma 957. Because when he takes up the ant and gives this little speech about powers greater in the universe that we don't understand, I think this is genuinely a fascination of his. This seems like something that he is interested in, and the fact that he now has somebody to share this with, which he otherwise couldn't get. He can't send anybody there in good conscience, but he can be not convincing enough so that she encounters that. I think there is something genuine to this. And if we go a little bit into the characterization, I think there is a little parallel between him and Londo opened up here, where in Born to the Purple, Londo talked about the fact that, oh, I have to wear all these masks, and in Centauri society, it's always this titles and presentation, and I don't know what is beneath there. And then in this episode, Jakar talks about a very similar thing. Nobody here is quite what they seem, but he seems very self-assured in between his official self and his private self. These seem to be very distinct, just in the way that he portrays himself, the way he talks, the way he gestures around and such, that there seems to be a much clearer sense of he knows who he is if he isn't the ambassador of the Narn regime, which Londo doesn't. And I think this is just a nice parallel between these two different characters, that they have a much different appreciation. I also couldn't imagine Londo having any level of appreciation for a wondrous instance like this, as Jakar does, yeah.
would like to see that. But yeah. Is there more to the Catherine plot? Because I don't think so.
Not really.
One thing that I really like, and this is partially just on the meta level, we get a Catherine plot that has nothing to do with Sinclair, and I think she shows remarkable resolve. Like I really like this character, and in a lot of big parts this is due to her being in the spaceship, getting hit by a hyperdimensional mega being cosmic entity that just brushes past her and sends her into a terminal descent. And at no point she panics, at no point she stops trying to find solutions. She just very calmly goes through the motions of, can I reroute energy? Can I get escape velocity? When help arrives, she just immediately knows what to do. So she's very, very good at her job, and she's very good at this entire adventuring thing. And I think this is just nice to see from a character who didn't necessarily was set up as someone who gets a lot of their own storylines.
Yeah, I really liked that part, and especially in contrast to the last episode, because her only purpose seemed to be with being with Sinclair and having sex with him and stuff like that. And here she is entitled only to herself, her job, her passion, clearly. She really develops a character here.
Yes.
And otherwise it was before just her interaction with Sinclair. I mean, she barely did she talk with someone else? I think just with a guy who gave her the money.
Yes.
And that's it.
She had this singular interaction where we already learned that she's good at her job, but there she kind of lucked into it. But even then it was immediately capped by she wants to celebrate, and there's nobody else that she can do this with other than Sinclair, because she has no other friends on the station and such. So it's nice to see that she got a lot more to do here.
Yeah. I think for the main discussion that was it. Was it?
Yes.
Can you do the tapestry without me?
Sure. I mean, you are prone to spoil stuff anyway, so we can cut you out for this.
Yeah,
And
I would really like to sign off now.
yeah, sure. Take care of the kitty.
Yeah, that's basically just for who's watching. That was not Mira. I didn't bring Mira on vacation. I'm home with another cat. That's also fun.
I think this one is notably smaller, so people will be able to tell. Let's get into the tapestry a little bit. And I think this episode is an interesting candidate for this because it does open a lot of doors. As usual, we are going to talk a little bit about the connecting tissue of Babylon 5, where we look at themes, character elements, topics that carry through the entire show that might not be related to the main plot, but still make it feel like it's one of a greater whole rather than just an episodic show from the 90s. And to start out with, we always like to look at things from previous episodes that carried over into this one. And there are some elements here, especially if we look at character stuff, but also I think a few new elements, especially if we look at somebody like Jakar. Like, we already talked about this a little bit. Maybe, Mikey, you can tell us some more about how your perception of Jakar has stayed the same or maybe shifted a little bit over the course of the past few episodes.
I think the part mentioned before with I think it was you, Alex, with Jakar having this two side, the ambassador side and himself, and I think that became more clear because at the beginning you had more Jakar as a person, and there wasn't much to differentiate him between his ambassador part or his ambassador job. It seemed more like one person with decisions and everything, and especially this episode made it clear that things he does as an ambassador doesn't have to incline with him as a person, which makes it interesting to see what will happen in the future, because there it's quite obvious to see that there's some point where these two sides crash, because he has to do something as an ambassador. He obviously that goes so against his persona. That's certainly something to see.
I agree, and I think even in retrospect, this also can make you wonder how much of himself is in the actions that he took in previous episodes. Like, how invested is he himself in the whole Ragash 3 thing? And I fully believe that he is genuinely hellbent on vengeance against the Centauri, but from what we hear in this episode, using somebody like Londo's cousin to get to Londo himself doesn't maybe seem like something that he's entirely comfortable with. Like, he makes it very clear in this episode he wouldn't want to use Catherine to get to Sinclair, because that's a private relationship that he doesn't seem like very eager to utilize immediately, even though he totally could. So maybe this is part where we can kind of see glimpses that maybe not everything that happened previously is something that he himself personally 100% endorses. And that's just a nice nuance.
I think it makes him quite honorable in his actions.
Yeah,
because he's clearly setting a line there and not crossing it.
And he is willing to back these personal actions also up with some of the official resources that he has. He does scramble an actual Narn fighter to do that. Just as a side note, of course, it's more realistic that there's like a border force that he can utilize. It still would have been fun to see Natoth in that fighter and talk with Catherine and like pulling her out of there and scolding her. I think that would have been fun, but alas, we can't have everything.
Yeah, though I have to admit, I would really love more interactions between the female part of the crew or the characters.
Yes.
And I mean, not talking about the guys, except for maybe thrashing a bit about them, but that really like this interaction with Talia and Ivanova at the beginning. Maybe not such a heavy topic, but more interaction between these would be interesting, and I think in certain constellations even quite funny to see.
I mean, if we're talking about this, we already had a lot of scenes with Sinclair and Delenn together. I would like to see how this plays out if Sinclair is busy for once and she has to deal with Susan Ivanova instead as the second in command, because I think they have such opposing backgrounds and such opposing views in some parts, and the way they carry themselves, it could be a very interesting pairing to see how these two deal with each other, because there's no real reason for antagonism between them, but still, like, Susan's experience from the war and such might be something that she brings up in a different way to Dylan than it would be otherwise possible. Which we can chalk up immediately as a hope for the future more interactions of this kind. Another thing that carries over from previous episodes, we already talked a little bit connected to Kosh and connected to the League of Non-Aligned Worlds, this idea. It would be fun to meet new aliens and to learn a little bit more about how the galaxy is set up. And even though the Walkers have a very, very small appearance in this episode, they do open up, I feel like, the galaxy massively, because up to this point we had like the small alien races, then we had the major alien races with Earth Alliance and the Minbari and Narn and such, and then we had like the Vorlons as this mysterious race that nobody has ever seen, and they only come to the station if they want to mess with us really bigly. And now we have something, and at least this is the impression that I get, that is even more mysterious, maybe even more powerful than the Vorlons, like these entities that are so far removed that you don't even get an ambassador from them on Babylon 5. There's not even a question of even seeing them in an encounter suit. They are more like this force of nature that exists out there that you have no way of approaching.
And on a side note there, I was really happy to see that it was not like Star Trek's Q. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I would have kept watching, because this idea was so annoying, and I was so happy to see that this was more separated and, yeah, like you said, more a force of nature and not this arrogant, love version of I am better than you. I mean, we have this enough with the PsiCorps
Yeah.
Bester. But I really like this version, which makes it interesting to see, okay, what is out there, because it's not a negative experience you get there. I mean, yes, Catherine almost died, but it wasn't like
There
we
is
wanted
no
her to
intent
die.
behind that. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So it will be interesting to see what will happen next. What is the next experience you get with this level of being?
And this is something that I'm always wrangling with a little bit when thinking about this episode, because of course there is a little bit of a parallel between these like very ancient monstrous aliens out there and what Ironheart becomes. But at the same time, it's also made a very clear distinction that Ironheart, to the very end, is very relatable. It's very easy to talk to him. He's basically just a human that has become super duper powerful. And these things, as Jakarta describes, just aren't. They are not going to bestow any gifts on you. They are just not aware that you are there. And I quite like this as a distinct depiction. And I also like that what we see of them is this like extremely colorful, maybe kind of organic, but mostly just like very strange looking thing that's and this is a small detail that I as a spaceship guy just like. Even the way they enter and leave isn't the normal like whirlwind of the hyperspace that we usually see. They seem to go directly into some kind of other dimension. So even just the fact that they are outside of the bounds what we've learned about faster than light travel and such in this universe is just nice to see.
I have to admit, the first time I saw this let's say organic space ship, I was thinking, oh, a horrible rendered flower pot is floating around.
A little bit. I've looked at one point a tiny bit into the design history, and one of the things the designers wrote was that they are very glad that at first glance nobody notices that it's basically just a bunch of foot bones. But if you look really closely, you can actually tell that there's like human anatomy merged into this thing in some parts. So it's an incredibly oddball design. It's very nice to see. And yeah, there's definitely the question, will we get to see more of this or things like this? And is this now the end of the power scale in Babylon 5, or is there something even stranger than this? Who knows?
And I mean, we don't really know if there is, at that point, if there's still something you can measure. I mean,
Yes.
Maybe there is something more powerful, but how do you measure this? I mean, you can't really put a
There's just no way to distinguish anymore at this point, right? Like they will just brush past you and be very dangerous, whether they are 1,000,000 times more powerful or 1,000,000,000,000 times more powerful. It's just not going to register for you anymore.
Yeah.
Then the other side of the plot, I think we already talked a lot that there are many missing pieces we have with regards to the PsiCorps at this moment. So all of these questions, how exactly does their categorization work? How exactly are people brought up? What happens to low-level telepaths if they join the Corps and such? All of these questions we can bundle up together as we probably have to learn more about the Corps. The one question that I always like to add to this is, will this tension come to a head? Because we have somebody like Ivanova, who also in this episode very openly opposes Bester and asks who watches the Watchers and such. So she's very critical of this. And at the same time, she's part of the same Earth Force, Earth government organization. But there's tension there. How many revelations about PsiCorps is it going to take before she says, okay, I can't be part of the same side anymore. Either they have to go or I do. I think this push for making PsiCorps something more separate from Earth is something that could even come from this direction.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree on that. And what I would like to see also is a contemporary part to Bester and his associate. Like, please give me some good guys in the PsiCorps, because there is always someone who wants to do the good thing. And I mean, yeah, we had Ironheart, but I wouldn't really count him here because of his situation. So
Yeah,
I like the bester version of good.
we get this hint that Ironheart, before he was experimented on, was already a good guy as part of the core, probably. Like, I can believe that he genuinely just wanted people to be helped and such as part of these instructor program, but it would be great to see this. I think it would also be great to see some genuine rogue telepaths that aren't like ascending to godhood at this moment, but are just these people that don't want to be part of PsiCorps and have to contend with the fact. And the same way that you would like to see some positive side on this, I'm also interested in seeing if there is some truth to how Besta portrays this. Like, what happens if a rogue telepath legitimately either goes insane or legitimately uses his powers for evil? Because that is something that can happen, and it could open some very difficult storylines, because we don't like PsiCorps, but if a guy like this runs around, you probably still want a PsiCorp to deal with that, because anybody else is going to have a very hard time. So there could be some interesting story potential there. All right, as usual, we asked some community questions over the past few weeks, and one of them was by Layla. She started a poll about the consciousness of the universe. She asked, is the universe itself conscious, being some kind of entity itself, and does it use telepathy and prophecies and such to communicate with itself? Like, how do we feel about this Minbari belief? And to how many people did this occur? And this was quite split. We have 36% of people that said, yes, this is how they view the show, and they take this as part of the mythology of the show. But we almost had just as many, with 27% each, that either said no, or at least not exactly. And I think Leda is still looking forward to people commenting some alternate views on this, but so far, we've just seen that people are kind of split on how they view this. How about you, Mike? How do you feel about the consciousness of the universe in this show?
Honestly, I don't get enough for me to settle there again.
So you're in the camp of maybe, but more evidence.
Yeah, I like the idea. I like the idea of because I like the idea of a karmic system, and that if you do something good, something good happens to you, and if it would be some kind of set in this direction, I really would love to see this.
Okay, so there's our metaphysical question dealt with. We also had a much more practical question, which is going to come up at the end of this recording anyway. And this is, what is people's preferred episode length? Because we were talking about, our most recent episodes have been running quite long. What would people like to see? And the options that we gave there was between 30 and 45 minutes, between 45 and 60 minutes, and 60 minutes plus, like up to 90 minutes. And the majority of people, a lot of people have voted on this so far, and there's still some time left. And the majority voted for 45 until 60 minutes, which I regrettably have to inform you about. We are over that today. We, within the first 60 minutes, talked about the whole telepath stuff, and then had to go over this. But I think what we can do to make things a little bit easier for people is use the chapter option on YouTube to indicate to people where the main discussion starts and ends, because this is usually in the 60-minute mark. So if people really want to shorten things, then they have a chance to just stick to the main discussion part, and then our little introductions and such they can keep out. We will try to curtail the length of our episodes, but I think especially in this one, we also noticed that every time we tried to move on, there were like some points that still were on our minds. So depending on the episode, it might be unavoidable that we go a little bit over that.
I mean, for those who say, the introduction part is not that interesting, that's okay. For those who say, we want to know more about those strange three people doing this podcast, we can surely make at some point maybe an FAQ, or that we can collect a few questions from you. but maybe not at this point. Maybe if we manage to get through the first season, that's something we can, especially there. Exactly. Do you have another poll? Otherwise, I would have a question for today's.
We can go on with further questions, because especially other polls we will usually pick up when these topics also come up again. Like if we have questions about the Centauri and Narn and such, we will probably not discuss them in an episode that has very little to do with those. So what is our question for today?
I thought it would, in an insight of what we discussed earlier, it would be nice to know, or interesting to know, what our dear lurkers think about PsiCorps, and what would you do if you were discovered to be a telepath? How would you react? Would you join PsiCorps? Would you take the medication? Would you go to jail? Or would you say, oh, fuck it all, I go rogue and I get out of here and turn out to be a refugee somewhere, or something like that? I think it's fitting and would be quite interesting to see.
I mean, there is always the secret option of mating with Jakar and becoming part of the Narn regime. We've learned this in the gathering, so maybe that's the solution. No, but this is a wonderful question, because it also asks kind of, would you be the good guy as part of PsiCorps, right? We are hoping to see a good version of Besta. Maybe that's something you're interested in doing. But okay, I think this is our question segment done. Do we want to go into the main outro?
Yes. So thank you for listening and watching, depending on your choice of channel. We hope you had fun. We hope we brought some interesting things to your mind, and would love if you leave a comment in the comment section, or share it, or just like it. If you want to go deeper into discussions, we have our Facebook group. And did I miss something? I'm sure I missed something.
I mean, just as a blanket statement, you can find us essentially on all social media platforms as the Third Age Podcast, and we are always very happy to engage with you in comments and questions in the polls that we put up. And we are also always very interested in feedback, especially in episodes like this one, where we try to pull in also some of the extended sources of the Babylon 5 universe to spice up our discussion. So yeah, we are just very interested, looking forward to talking to you, and otherwise to see you next week when we are going to talk about the War Prayer.